Tēnā koutou. I am Mojo Mathers, Chief Executive for the Disabled Persons Assembly. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's Kōrero for Change, a webinar series brought to you by Access Matters Aotearoa Trust. A big thank you to our funders who make this series possible. Spectrum Foundation, Foundation North, J.R. Mackenzie Trust, and Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People. We would also like to recognise our friend at People First New Zealand for their valuable support in creating our Easy Read programme. Today's focus is on Aotearoa's political and democratic processes. As a former Member of Parliament, this is a topic that is very close to my heart. We will be exploring the role of the political and democratic landscape in building access and equity for disabled people. We've invited thought leaders, academics, experts, policymakers, deaf, neurodivergent, disabled people, tangata Whaikaha Māori, and whānau haua to join us in having some courageous conversations about ableism and, when it comes to accessing our political and democratic system, what needs to change. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping notes. After each panel, you will have a chance to ask questions. Just use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to type them in. If you need to ask your question by speaking or signing, please use the raise hand function and our team will enable your audio and your voice video. Captions are available in two ways. Click on the captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or use the live transcript link we just dropped into the chat. We will also put into the chat a link to our webpage for alternative formats of the programme if needed. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be made publicly available on the Access Matters website. By staying with us, you are giving your consent to be recorded. David, our co-host, will now welcome us with a karakia.
Kia karakia tātou. Mauri oho, mauri tū, mauri ora, kia tātou. Haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Life force awaken, life force stand tall. Life force vitality for all present. Join, gather, entwine.
Thank you. Our next speakers are David Corner and Shara Turner, Senior Advocate Advisors from IHC New Zealand. Through their advocacy work, they support disabled people and whānau to navigate systems, uphold their rights, and address barriers to inclusion. Today, David and Shara will explore what ableism looks like within political and democratic processes, drawing on their extensive experience working alongside disabled people across Aotearoa. They will highlight the challenges many people face when trying to participate in decision-making, access information, and have their voices heard in our democracy. Please join me in welcoming David and Shara. Shara, over to you.
Kia ora. Thanks, Mojo. Thanks for inviting David and I to speak today. Can everyone hear me? You never know. You're just talking to the void. I think so. All good? Okay. So I'm going to speak quickly about political participation for people with intellectual disability mainly. Some people use the term learning disability, but David and I tend to use the term intellectual disability. Just let me move this over here. Hang on. I've got a little technical thing. And David is going to talk about his own experiences in decision making and politics. So when political participation is discussed, the conversation for people with intellectual disability is often limited to voting. Voting is really important, but being able to take part in big decisions and political processes starts much earlier than election day for people with intellectual disability. It begins with whether people are allowed to make decisions in their own lives, whether their decisions are listened to and acted upon, whether they can advocate for themselves, whether they are included in governance, and whether they can influence the decisions that affect them. We often call this voice, and to have a voice is at the very core of citizenship. I recently completed a dissertation that explored what accessibility looks like for people with intellectual disability. One thing that became clear is that accessibility is often understood in physical terms, such as ramps and lifts or accessible transport. These things are really super important, but accessibility also includes the ability to exercise voice and influence. For many people with intellectual disability, barriers to participation begin with everyday decisions. In my work, I've encountered people who've not been allowed to have lit birthday candles on their cake because of health and safety concerns. I've met people who are not allowed to move furniture in their own home. Some people weren't allowed to have a front door key. One person wasn't supported to attend their former partner's funeral. Another woman at 31 years old was told by a family that they couldn't go out for a night on the town because it wasn't safe for a person with intellectual disability. Most people would regard these as ordinary decisions that adults make every day. Yet for many people with intellectual disability, these choices remain controlled by others. So this is why supported decision making is so important. And I think everyone here knows that, but it's important to make clear how things like supported decision making link to things like voting. Article 12 of the Convention recognises that disabled people have the right to legal capacity on an equal basis with others. It requires governments to provide support so that others can make their own decisions rather than having their decisions made for them. I know we have some review of capacity law at the moment in New Zealand, but we still remain heavily reliant on substitute decision-making approaches. There's a lot of work to be done here embedding supported decision-making into our society. If people are not supported to make their own decision, if disabled people aren't, it becomes much harder for them to participate in public life and democracy. The next step to voting and citizenship and politics, self-advocacy. We talk quite a lot about self-advocacy in the world of intellectual disability, and you're all very lucky enough to hear from one of the best self-advocates in New Zealand in about 3 minutes. But outside of the ID world, I don't hear that much about self-advocacy. The self-advocacy movement emerged because people with intellectual disability recognized that too often others were speaking on their behalf. And self-advocacy is about recognizing that people with intellectual disability already have voices, and the challenge is ensuring that those voices are heard, respected, and acted upon. Self-advocacy also creates pathways into wider civic participation. It builds confidence, leadership skills, and the experience of influencing decisions. Beyond self-advocacy is being involved in governance. People with intellectual disability remain significantly underrepresented on boards, advisory groups, and leadership bodies, including within organisations that provide services to disabled people. This means decisions are often made without the perspectives of those most affected. Inclusive governance requires accessible information, reasonable accommodations, supported decision-making, and leadership development opportunities. All that good stuff we talk about all the time. But it also requires a willingness to challenge assumptions about who is capable of leadership. And the highest level of voice is political representation itself. During my research, I found astoundingly little literature examining people with intellectual disability as political candidates. Most research focused on voting rights. Very little research was about whether people with intellectual disability could hold public office. In fact, I found only 2 examples of this internationally. In 2020, Brian Russell, a man with Down syndrome from Peru, became the first person with Down syndrome in the world to run for public office. The fact that this was considered a global first illustrates how low expectations remain for people with intellectual disability in political life. Another example is Tane, a young man with Down syndrome who was selected as a candidate by the Belgian Green Party for local government. Rather than celebrating this as an example of inclusion, sections of the media dismissed his candidacy as a publicity stunt. Incidentally, I just looked him up yesterday, and I think he is still involved in politics. His website wasn't in English, so it was a bit of a struggle. And his top 2 policies seem to be about more summer bars. I don't know what this is, but it sounds like an amazing policy intervention, and also renewable energy, which I do know about and think is incredible. So Tane sounds exactly like what we need in New Zealand. The reactions to Tane tell us something important. The barriers facing people with intellectual disability are not just about access. They are also about attitudes and expectations. Society has spent generations assuming that people with intellectual disability are recipients of decisions rather than decision makers. At many levels, society has become comfortable with the idea that other people should speak for them, represent them, and decide what is best for them. The Convention challenges that assumption and recognises the right to make decisions and to participate in public and political life. Taken together, these rights require more than consultation. They require genuine participation. The question should not be whether people with intellectual disability are capable of participating in democracy. The question is, of course, what supports, accommodations, and systemic changes are needed to ensure they can participate on an equal basis with everyone else. Ultimately, political participation for people with intellectual disability is not simply a disability issue, it's a democratic issue. A democracy cannot claim to be fully inclusive when one of its most marginalised groups remains largely absent from the spaces where decisions are made. If we want an inclusive society, we must change minds and attitudes to ensure that people with intellectual disability are not only heard, but are present wherever decisions are being made, from their own homes to governance tables to Parliament itself. I cannot wait for the first day where the day we have our first political candidate in New Zealand with an intellectual disability. So that was what I wanted to say. And now I'm going to pass to David. You ready, David? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mojo, and thank you very, very much, Sarah. So, yeah, what I'm going to be talking about is people with intellectual disability. I use the term intellectual disability. I find it a lot easier to say, and learning disability is a too wide a spectrum, you know. It's almost like the song you used to learn at Sunday school. It's got the whole world in his hands. Well, you know, and that's where learning disability goes on the spectrum. But yeah, but I could go on for hours. But yeah, but it's important that people are actually involved in things. Like I had an example quite a number of years ago when I went to Idea Services Day base in Wellington, and I was doing a survey with people, and there was a person with intellectual disability at the day, one of the many at the day base, and I was doing a survey just for my own work, and this person wanted to be involved in the survey, which was fine, and it got up to the part when, you know, I asked the person to put their name on the paper. You know, I wasn't going to send it anywhere or mention the name, and this person wanted to be involved, and the staff said, "Excuse me, I've got to check with the person's father," you know. And then she come back and said that the person wasn't allowed. Well, you know, she only said to me, you know, no one actually said to the person, "Hey, you're not allowed to be part of this," and things, you know. So, you know, I just wonder about things. It would have been really helpful for at the start if they'd been told, hey, you know, if the person was halfway through, it's almost, you, I guess it, actually really has an impact on the person, It almost feels like, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that. Like, it almost makes you feel like, God, useless, I can't do that, I can't do, self-worth, whatever. But yeah, so it would have been a lot more better, if I'd probably been able to speak to the father and things, explain what I was trying to do, yeah. So people with intellectual disabilities can and should be able to make decisions. As one of my friends once said, if you can't make a decision between having toast and jam on your, or having marmalade and jam on your toast, how can you make a decision? Or having tea and coffee in the morning, It's just a basic decision, and we can all make decisions. Now, I don't know whether anyone here listened to a Zoom thing that myself and Dr. Nicolina Newcomb and Ollie Golden is involved in Enabling Good Lives did. We did a thing for the Neurodiversity Week on Monday about people being involved in committees and things, which almost links to what Shara was saying, so it's really good. So I think that's about all I've got to say, but, it's really important that, people with intellectual disabilities with the right help and support can do anything. Many years ago, I didn't think I'd be doing what I am today and things. We just look at what Sir Robert Martin achieved. If you look at his background coming from institutions and things, he's done amazingly well with the help and support and things. One of the, so yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much, David and Shara, for these incredibly important insights and reminding us of the importance that with the right support, we can do anything, including all of us. And your perspective has highlighted issues that are critical to creating an inclusive systems and experiences, including in participation. So now I will introduce our next speaker. Actually, little introduction. Dr. Huana Hickey is a highly respected disability rights lawyer, academic, and advocate who has spent decades championing the rights of disabled people in Aotearoa. And many of you will know her from her thought-provoking writing and commentary, and including her increasingly influential Substack articles, which I take great pleasure in reading as soon as they come out, and where she continues to challenge assumptions and spark important conversation. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Rana Hickey. Over to you.
Thank you, Mojo. Excuse me, everybody, I'm recovering from the flu, so I hope I don't have too many coughing sessions. But I want to talk to you today about democracy being more than just a majority rule situation. And I'll try and bring some of the language I've got and explain it plainer for those that may not be used to this language. I'm used to it, some others are, but a lot of people don't have that depth of knowledge. So I'll try and keep it simple. But a democracy is not simply a system where the majority gets what it wants. A healthy democracy also protects minorities from discrimination and arbitrary, or rather any anti-government action. So, the government at the moment, as you know, has made decisions for disabled without us in some ways, and that's arbitrary. So without that government action, that is why we have constitutional principles. And a constitution is a set of statements that we are all guided by. Those principles, the courts, human rights legislation, and international agreements. And without those safeguards, democracy can become little more than the exercise of power. What we're seeing now is it's a threat to our democracy. Will we lose it or will we regain it? Do we have enough power? And the power comes in the form of legislation, law. New Zealand has committed itself to protecting disabled people's rights through several important frameworks. These include Te Tiriti Waitangi, that establishes our relationship based on partnership and active protection. The New Zealand Bill of Rights, 1990, affirms or supports our fundamental civil and political rights. The Human Rights Act, 1993, it prohibits or does not allow discriminations on the grounds of disability. The United Nations on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which New Zealand signed in 2007 and ratified in 2008. The optional protocol to that allowed individuals to seek international scrutiny when domestic remedies have been exhausted. These are not just aspirational in the air, wish to have laws or documents. They actually represent the promises that governments have made to disabled people. And let us remember, the pilot program for enabling good lives was started under National through the late Honourable Tariana Turia. So it's not one side against the other. It seems that we have governments that support and governments who don't quite know that they're meant to support. We're here to remind them to support. So we're going into co-design. One of the strongest principles within the UN CRPD is that disabled people must be closely consulted and actively involved in developing and implementing legislation and policy. So in developing and being included in making decisions on their legislation and policy. This is in Article 4.3 of the UN CRPD, which embodies the principle of, and I think we all know this, repeat it after me at home, nothing about us without us. Simple, isn't it? For Māori, this aligns closely with the treaty principles, Te Tiriti principles of partnership and rangatiratanga. Good legislation, good laws should not be written for communities in isolation from those communities. It should be developed alongside them. So the good laws that they're doing, the DSS bill, shouldn't be decided on without us. We should be involved all the way. An 8.5 hour time frame to do all the oral submissions is not consultation. So the current challenge, many disabled feel that recent legislative and policy developments have moved away from a rights-based approach and towards a fiscal or administrative model. In other words, they've gone from nothing about us without us to, oh, we don't have enough money and so we need to control it and we can't give you that right to make your own decision. They have taken all of that stuff away. The concern is not only about individual policies, it is about a broader question. Are disabled people rights holders, or are we becoming recipients of discretionary assistance? What does that mean? So do we have rights, or are we just expected to just take what's given on whatever the government decides? And it matters to understand that distinction, that difference. Rights create obligations on the state. Discretion can be withdrawn. Indigenous rights create obligations on the state. Discretion can be withdrawn. But what about our rights? What about maintaining those? It is the state that has that responsibility. When we start hearing the state talking about natural supports, when we start to hear them talk about fiscal or monetary issues, we know that they're not coming towards a rights-based decision. They're doing it based on money, shortages of money. It's not our job. It's not our family's job. It is not our fault that we are disabled, okay? The state has an obligation to look after all its citizens, and disabled people are citizens. That is why we have rights. There's no other two ways about it. We are citizens of the state, and they have an obligation to us. And that matters. For whānau haua, tangata whaikaha Māori, which I am, there are overlapping legal responsibilities. The Crown must consider both its obligations under the treaty and its obligations under the UN CRPD. This means recognising that disability cannot be separated from culture, identity, language, your whakapapa, and your community. In other words, you can't just compartmentalise rights. Oh, I think we'll put the right to sign language in this little box here. I'm going to put the right to Braille or technology to support me as I'm blind over in this little box. Oh, we won't pick that one out for sign language because it's at the hospital. Their son's here. They can do the interpreting. That sort of thing. That's not what we need. We need our rights. We need the autonomy. And that is for us to make that decision, not for anyone else. So the Crown must consider its obligations. An Indigenous approach to disability is not just about equity. It's about self-determination. There's a lot of similarities between Māori and disabled. Both are fighting for our own self-determination. Both are fighting for our rights to be who we are. Both are fighting for the rights of our whānau to be paid accordingly, to have the right to be a part of our lives. This is about that self-determination. One of the greatest weaknesses in our democratic system is that many decisions affecting disabled are made without disabled representation. If you remember when they cut our budgets, they had a panel of 3 people. Not one was disabled. None were known in the disability community to even know the issues. Yet we have experts in our own communities who could have written up the report. And if we look at the wonderful Donald Beasley Institute and how they put together that data set of our statistics and everything, we are capable of providing the expertise that they wanted. They cut our budgets without understanding what that meant. So representation is not symbolic. It is a constitutional safeguard. By not including us, they created a situation of danger to our community. When those affected by the law are absent from the decision-making table, the risk of unintended harm increases, and we're already seeing this happening now. Lived experience should be recognised as a legitimate form of expertise. What would an inclusive democracy look like? Well, it would embed nothing about us without us into the law, first and foremost. It would recognise te tiriti as a living constitutional relationship. In other words, we're bound to each other in partnership. That's our relationship. Ensure disabled and Indigenous representation in governance. In other words, I was in love when Mojo became our MP. I watched as they tried to dismiss the need for sign language and all the other needs that she had there. But she stuck by it, the Greens stuck with her, and we got Mojo for that 3 years. And it was a fantastic, it really gave our young people a dream and hope. It gave a lot of us hope. But then if we're looking at putting, say, someone in a wheelchair into government, they're going to have to redo the whole building, knock it down and create a new beehive, I think. But strengthen the accountability through human rights mechanisms. We haven't strengthened them yet. The Human Rights Act is not strong on its own, but it is strong when we put all these other instruments together, these bits of law. And it is time that we have a Disabilities Act. Measure success. not by savings, not by, oh, the state saved $3 billion. Yes, but Johnny got left in the bath for 4 hours because they only had a 1-hour carer. So, measure it not by the savings of funding, but by whether people can participate fully in society. There is a myth that we are unproductive people. There is a myth that we don't give to society. There is a myth that we don't work. There is a myth that we're not capable. I've known David and I've watched him over the decades grow into his advocacy. And that shows that he is very capable, as many others are, of becoming good self-advocates and advocates for the community. We do not need to accept their languaging of us. We are, in our own rights, we are citizens of this country. We therefore require our legislators, our government politicians, to be there for all of us, not be there just for the rich and the able-bodied. And my wordle to them is that every political party should be able to bring disabled people in as candidates and start to push the narrative of inclusion. Nothing about us without us. As a lawyer, I understand that rights only have meaning, and if they can be exercised. As a disabled Māori woman, I understand that participation is not guaranteed simply because it is written in legislation. Accessibility, inclusion, and representation are not special interests. They are the foundations of democratic legitimacy. In other words, they are the foundation of nothing about us without us. Aotearoa has already made commitments through Te Tiriti, through our domestic laws, and through international human rights conventions. The question before us is not whether we know what to do. I think we do. The question is whether we have the political courage to honour those commitments. A democracy should be judged not by how well it serves the powerful, but by how faithfully it protects the rights and dignity of those whose voices have too often been ignored. And on that, I'd say we've got an election coming up this year. 145 days, I think it is, something like that. We have an opportunity in a way we've never had. We're a voting bloc of 25%. If we could collectively work together, we could make this a very powerful election issue. I know with one party, very minority, they are. I know others are looking at it. I don't want to hear from the candidates that, but we can't do everything again. We can't fix everything they've done wrong because we haven't got enough money. Because that goes back to the state looking at fiscal issues. If they've got enough money to give Robbie Williams millions for his concert here in Aotearoa, they've got enough money for Johnny and Jenny to have a time at Rainbow's End with their carer supports. If they've got enough money to give tax cut breaks to the landlords, then they've got enough money to make state housing accessible. As a Crown Director, Housing New Zealand, before it changed to KO, we had the first accessible consultations of its kind ever through housing. We had the biggest turnout. We had a strategy. We were making a difference. And it's all gone. It doesn't mean it's over. We're in one of the hardest parts of our time now. And I want to urge you all not to give up. I want to urge you all to work together. Let us collaborate, let us grow, and let us come together. A democracy is the right to vote. A democracy is a right to stand there and become a candidate. A democracy is our right to say, no, we don't accept this. We are citizens too. not just the Ogalarks. You know, give me $1 million and I'll show you what I can do for my community. I want to implore you to get out there and get your friends and your families to vote, because that is what will give us our democracy and our hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rana, for that powerful presentation and that powerful call to action. And you are right. Democracy is so much more than just a vote or a majority rule. It is about participation and involvement in decision making. And nothing about us without us. Absolutely. I love the idea of it being embedded in law. Let's see if we can make that happen. And so we will now move to our first panel, which represents our deciders and thinkers. And we are pleased to welcome Piotr Mijewski as moderator for our first panel. So Piotr is a social worker in private practice and a tutor in social work and has learned at Otago University. He is also on the board of the Aotearoa New Zealand Association of Social Workers. Thank you very much, Piotr, and welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mojo. I really appreciate the introduction. Okay, so as Mojo has stated, we're going to be talking about democracy and politics and how accessible are they. So today with me, we're going to have Anusha Gala, who is the Deputy Chief Executive the Deputy Chief Executive of Operations for the Electoral Commission of New Zealand. We're going to have Rebecca Elvey, who is the Deputy Chief Executive of the Outreach and Innovation for Waikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People. And we're also going to have Doctors Emily, please excuse me if I mispronounce your name, but it's Emily Biosolai. Please correct me later. And of course, Dr. Robbie Francis Vatara, who is the Disability Research Lead for the Donald Beasley Institute. Okay, so the topic again is around the politics and democracy being accessible. So let me just start off with the question of what role does politics and democracy processes play in creating a inclusive and belonging for people with disabilities? Anusha, can you please answer that, or at least start the process and just introduce yourself as you speak?
Sure, everyone. Ko Anusha Gula Aho. I'm Anusha Gula from the Electoral Commission. And just in response to you, Piotr, it's a critical element for people to feel a sense of belonging so that they have a level playing ground to participate in democracy and voting and enrolling. So that's a core part of a democracy for society.
Rebecca?
Am I supposed to do my 5-minute presentation now, or should I?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Anusha. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I'd just like to thank Access Matters for organizing today's event. And when I thought about your question, I didn't know whether we were going to do our 5-minute or answer your question. So like I said, I think participating in elections and the democratic process is a core part for all New Zealanders to feel that they belong to New Zealand, and elections from our perspective, has to be accessible to make sure people can participate. And for me, election also fosters a sense of inclusion and strengthens social cohesion, which are critical elements in an electoral system so that New Zealanders understand and trust the democratic process. To have an effective and impartial electoral system, we have to make sure that the electoral process works for everyone, including deaf and disabled people. Without that, understanding and trust will be impacted. We have worked over many election cycles to provide accessible election services that support deaf and disabled people to understand and take part in elections. Each time we continue to evolve and improve, and at the same time, there's always more work to do. It's important to note that the democratic system is broader than just the parliamentary elections, which is what the Commission is responsible for. The democratic process includes governments, political parties and their policies, local government, and the media. It's important that those spaces are accessible too. While the Commission might not have a direct role in these spaces, if our work is accessible and inclusive and leads to someone engaging in enrolling and voting, this can impact civic participation in those areas as well. Turning back to this year's general election, which is scheduled for the 7th of November, the Commission is well underway with our planning and preparation to deliver this election. We aim to deliver a range of accessible services, such as setting up as many accessible voting places in each electorate as possible, ensuring our advertising and our resources are accessible and inclusive, providing telephone dictation services that support people who are blind, partially blind, and have a physical disability to vote secretly. We also administer the Election Access Fund, and I know Mojo Matters would be very familiar with this. And this is to support disabled people to receive funding to support them standing as a candidate in the parliamentary elections. This year, we have a particular focus on ensuring people are enrolled early. We're starting to roll out initiatives to support people to enroll, and these include our community engagement teams popping up around the country with mobile enrollment hubs and providing a fund to support organizations to educate their communities about enrollment. So due to a legislative change this year, enrollment will not be allowed during voting. So you have to be enrolled before voting starts. However, we know that even after providing these services and a more accessible election service, many people will still face barriers to enrolling and voting. I know many of you tuning in today will understand these barriers better than I do. We are working hard to ensure that all voters have an easy, positive experience enrolling and voting. And what we don't get right this time, we will look at improving it for next time. Delivering accessible elections is an important long-term and complex job. And we're committed and will continue to work with the disability sector this year and going forward to ensure each election is more accessible than the last. We have come a long way, but we know there's always more work to do to make enrolling and voting easy for everyone, and that all New Zealanders can have confidence in the results. Democracy is for everyone, and therefore the systems and processes in place to take part should work for everyone. We all have a role to play to make this a reality. I look forward to hearing the rest of the Kōrero today and answering any questions you may have. Thank you. Handing over back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Anisha. Rebecca.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Rebecca Elvie tōku ingoa. My sign name is this for my hair. It's lovely to be here today and feeling very humbled by the esteemed colleagues who have already spoken and are still to come. So thank you for the opportunity. From a whaikaha perspective, our role is really about system stewardship. And we're not the owners of the electoral process, but we do have a responsibility to work alongside and across government to ensure that the system, all of the system, delivers for disabled people in practice, not just in principle. At its simplest, our role is to help shift or push the system from participation being available to participation being accessible, equitable, and inclusive by design. We are guided by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and that includes the right for disabled people not only to vote, but to do so independently, with dignity, and on an equal basis with others. Our role at whaikaha is to support agencies to give effect to that and how systems are designed, implemented, and experienced. We do know from survey data that disabled people report voting at similar rates to non-disabled people. Stats New Zealand survey data suggests that disabled people vote at broadly similar rates to non-disabled people, around 84% in general elections and around 63% in local body elections. These figures come from the General Social Survey, which is a nationally representative survey of people's participation in civic life. But they are self-reported and don't capture the barriers or effort involved in that participation. The other thing is that disabled people tend to rely on government services at a higher rate than non-disabled people. So the question I would be asking is, how many disabled people wanted to vote and couldn't because of barriers in the system? Participation is not just about whether people vote, it's about how they vote, what they rely on, and what it costs them to participate. Easy and dignified participation builds trust and confidence. And we do also know from the Kiwis Count survey, which measures people's experiences and trust in public services, that disabled people tend to report lower levels of trust where systems don't work well for them in practice. For whaikaha, accessibility is not just a technical issue, it is directly connected to the trust in our democratic system. So what does this mean in practice? A key part of our role is working alongside system leaders like the Electoral Commission to strengthen accessibility and inclusion. For example, the Electoral Commission is developing its Disability Inclusion Action Plan, and whaikaha has contributed advice and support to that work. We also play a role in connecting the Commission and other organisations with the disability community so that lived experience can directly inform system design and delivery. This is a real practical expression of system stewardship where we can bring together policy expertise, operational delivery, and lived experience, and ensuring that these decisions are informed by those who are most affected by them. But system stewardship is also about being honest about where the system is not yet working. We know there are still barriers. People rely on others to participate. There are challenges accessing information, and for some, not being able to vote independently and in secret. We also see differences across the system. In parliamentary elections, there tends to be more consistency and a stronger accessibility focus. But local body elections, participation can be more fragmented and is often less accessible in practice. So part of our role is also to highlight those differences. Looking ahead, we also are keen to make sure that we're enabling future improvements. That includes supporting innovation like digital voting, where it can improve independence, while also ensuring these systems are safe, trusted, and accessible from the outset. The possibility of candidate information being in alternate formats, and also strengthening our understanding, particularly where there are gaps in data about participation and experience. So in summary, our role at Whaikaha is to support system leaders to design accessible systems, connect those systems with the lived experience of disabled people, and to help ensure that participation is not only possible, but equitable and meaningful. Ultimately, an inclusive democracy is one where disabled people are not just participating, but are visible, influential, and shaping the system itself. Kia ora and thank you.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. I really appreciate that. Before we just move on to Emily, I just want to emphasize a little bit, because I've just been monitoring the questions and answers. One of the things is about the language of how disabled people or people with disabilities refer to ourselves, I guess. I just want to emphasize that language is a very important component in how we identify, and it's also a very personalized way of how we identify. Like I myself, I am quite happy to be called either a disabled person or person with a disability or person with a physical disability. So it's all about personal choice. Just wanted to emphasize that. All right, Emily, so can you put in your thoughts about the role of politics and the democratic processes in play?
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki ngā mana whenua o te rohe nei, Poneke, Te Aotearoa me Taranaki whānui me Ngāti Toa Rangatira hoki. Thank you to all of those who are gathered here today and made today possible. I'm so fortunate to be learning alongside you, and there's so much to learn from you. So my name's Emily Beausoleil, and the esteemed Huhana Hiki started with the really important provocation that democracy is so much more than voting. And we typically think of it as voting and maybe referenda and maybe select committee submissions as the extent of the ways we have a voice, what Ashara was talking about as well, voice and influence. But that's such a thin version of what it means to have a voice, which is ultimately the idea behind Nothing About Us Without Us of, if we're affected by a decision, we should be able to shape those decisions. And so majority rule tools like referenda and voting, they can silence up to 49% of us. They're really brute instruments, blunt instruments. And when we're only deciding every 3 years who decides for us, we know that's not the fullness of democracy. So while we need to focus on this important question of how we improve access in our voting, in our elections, and also who is even running as candidates, those are beautiful questions. I want to focus on democratic innovations that are happening around the world to empower communities to come together, learn about an issue, hear from each other, and then decide together, what are we going to do about it? What's best for us? And that's sometimes, it's the language of democratic innovation is often used for this. So there are millions of examples around the world of this, thousands and thousands of examples of models it can take. In India, at the village level, dialogues feed up to the national budget. In Iceland, they rewrote their constitution using social media. as a nation. In Chicago, policing is overseen by community dialogues where police are accountable to but hear from communities through these dialogue processes. Here in Porirua, a Ngāti Toa Rangatira led the world's first citizens' assembly that was Indigenous and Te Tiriti led, and there was a sample that was representative, like a reflection of the broader community of Porirua, randomly selected, and they met with Mana Whenua and decided together what was the climate response for Porirua. You know, so it's happening here, and this is already about more inclusion, like meaningfully be included in the decisions that shape our lives, that is revitalizing democracy around the world. But in these places too, so many forms of exclusion need to be navigated. So I want to talk about those. There are challenges, of course, of getting to the table, but there are also challenges of being heard and seriously considered when at the table. So who has the time and resources to be involved? Whose experiences to date would make them trust government enough to participate? Rebecca was speaking about trust there, and Anusha was talking about who can get access to the voting booth. Who comes from backgrounds that make them more confident to speak or presume to speak for longer than others, or speak in ways that are more common sense or sound more authoritative in a room? Whose cultural protocols, values, and terms are shaping that process? And if participants are chosen because they're a demographic sample of that broader community, that can replicate those inequalities in that broader society between majority and minority communities. And it can oversimplify representation when a minority community is said to be represented by only one or two people, right? Oversimplifying the diversity of experiences and perspectives in any given community. Finding creative and non-Western ways of designing a participatory process can often make a huge difference to meaningful inclusion. In Vancouver, Canada, I saw members of the homeless and mental health community able to share their expertise, disprove biases and test theories, and innovate effective housing policy because they did this through bringing their experiences on stage in a participatory theater process, rather than standard arguments or policy language. Here in Porirua, I saw the difference it made to rangatahi, Pacific, and tangata whenua participation to use language and protocols that reflected these communities, and how caucusing, separating into separate forums, into mana whenua and community assembly dialogues, meant these dialogues were designed to work best for these conversations, these communities. And it meant greater balance when these communities were brought together in the joint deliberations later. So there are many ways that inequalities find their way back into democratic innovations. If they're going to realize this aspiration of being really inclusive, these need to be negotiated. But there are two insights from these kinds of experiments that feel useful to mention. One, that co-design of these processes with minoritized communities is key. No amount of design feature cleverness will ever take the place of authentic co-design. The very nature of exclusion means those who don't experience it will never fully understand or see it. In fact, this is one of the main reasons behind having a democracy. Having everyone who's affected by a decision meaningfully shape it doesn't just take us closer to a fairer society. It also is because we make better decisions this way. Those affected by a decision are the experts in how that decision affects them. As John Dewey said famously when advocating for greater participation in democracy, the shoemaker knows how to make the shoe, but only the person who wears it can tell you where it pinches. It is inescapable that we will never fully grasp what is impacting others and how. And this is even worse when it comes to minoritized experiences and aspiration. aspirations. This means any democratic project needs to be co-designed from the beginning by those most affected by exclusions. The second big insight I've seen over time within these innovations is that what is good for marginalized communities is often good for everyone. To borrow Andrew Dobson's phrase, speed is the friend of the powerful and an enemy of the powerless, or at least of those whose voices are not typically heard. Often, sites of community consultation or public dialogue are created quickly, in cookie-cutter fashion, and with a short time frame for deliverables, which means we continually turn to what is already the norm, what works for already advantaged or centered groups, and marginalize others in these very efforts to give voice. When we slow down and open ourselves to questioning whether our ways are the ways, and we open ourselves to learning and experimenting so that the most minoritized people are shaping our designs, this often yields more relational and supportive, more whole-bodied and humanized ways of working that take better care of everyone. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Emily. Robbie.
Tēnā koutou e hoa mā, ko Robbie Francis Wātini tōku I koa, e noho ana au ki Kirikiri Roa, he tākata tiriti ahau, he wāhine whaikaha ahau, he kairaka hau mātua whaikaha ki te Donald Beasley Institute ahau. Morning everyone, are we still morning? Yes, we're still morning. Robbie is my name and I am calling in today as Disabled Research Lead at the Donald Beasley Institute. So I guess I wanted to bring a slightly different perspective to the panel today by shining a light on disabled person-led monitoring. Because ultimately a democratic political system can only foster true inclusion and belonging if it upholds the independent voices of those it exists to serve. So I'm going to start with a very brief background. As you know, in 2008, Aotearoa became one of the first countries to sign up to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And included in the convention is Article 33, which I believe is one of its most innovative provisions. And it ensures that there is independent oversight over or monitoring of a government's implementation of disability rights. Now, monitoring means checking that the government is doing what they said they would do. Because as you know, it's very easy for governments to sign these agreements, but making them real in everyday life is much harder. So shortly after New Zealand's ratification of the convention, the New Zealand DPO Coalition was formally established as a collection of disability organisations that had actually contributed to the drafting of the convention at the UN. And the coalition wrote to the government of the time and suggested several ideas about how disability rights could be monitored, including an active partnership between DPOs and the government. And then in 2010, the Independent Monitoring Mechanism, IMM, was then set up. And the IMM is made up of three parts. You've got the Human Rights Commission, the Ombudsman's Office, and the DPO Coalition. Now, importantly, the third part of Article 33 of the Convention says that disabled people must be involved in monitoring processes through their representative organisations. And this is where the DPO Coalition comes in. So while the Coalition isn't the only group that can do this work, its inclusion alongside the Human Rights Commission and the Ombudsman's Office signifies the government's formal commitment to disabled people's involvement in monitoring processes. So collectively, the IMM monitors if and how the government is implementing disability rights. And then every 4 years, they share their monitoring findings with an expert committee at the UN. The committee then issues recommendations back to the New Zealand government on how they can do better. Now, in 2018, the DPO Coalition contracted us, the Donald Beasley Institute, to lead the disabled person-led monitoring under Article 33.3. Using a methodology called Disability Rights Promotion International, Our monitoring research enables everyday disabled people and their whānau throughout the country to have a say on how the government is doing when it comes to disability rights. Now, crucially, all the data we collect, analyse, and write into reports is by us, an independent, diverse, all-disabled research team. The findings are then translated into accessible formats and placed back into the hands of disabled people so that they can use them as tools of advocacy. So how does this particular approach to monitoring promote inclusion and belonging in democratic processes? Well, no monitoring system is perfect, and neither are we. But our model has been recognised globally as one of the most progressive. We know that the wheels of democracy and systemic change turn incredibly slowly, and monitoring, unfortunately, is no exception. However, a political system can only foster genuine inclusion and belonging when it embeds the independent, self-determined voices of those it serves. Our model of disabled person-led monitoring does this by ensuring that disabled people and their whānau are not merely passive recipients of discretionary assistance, as Dr. Who highlighted earlier, but active architects of democratic oversight. They can trust that the monitoring research is ethical, it's rigorous, it's accessible. And most importantly, monitoring bridges the gap between grassroots reality and the high-level political systems. It can be used for agitating for change at the highest levels of government and the UN, while also returning accessible data back to the community as a tool for everyday advocacy. And this is the fundamental role of a truly inclusive democratic system. It's creating the mechanism, the funding, and the independent space for disabled people to hold power to account. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Robbie. Really appreciate that. Okay, look, it looks like we're going into overtime a little bit, so I just want to throw in some questions. I have a question already from EJ, who is asking directly for Rebecca, and EJ would like to know about, I don't know, just find the question. Just give me a second. Okay, so he's saying, kia ora, Rebecca. I'm glad to hear the numbers of disabled voters versus non-disabled voters is as high as it is. I think I heard you say that you got the data from the Access survey. Who runs that survey? Is it State New Zealand or is it someone else?
Kia ora, and thank you for the question. I think we have actually also typed the answer in, but just to confirm that the participation rates are self-reported participation rates in the Stats NZ General Social Survey, the results of which are available online if anybody wants to check it out. I also did talk about the Kiwis Count survey, which is a Public Service Commission run survey into trust and confidence in government services. So that was the framing between participation and trust in the services that people experience. Thank you for the question. It's a great one.
Thank you. Right. Another question is around what is it that's been done outside of New Zealand, the democratic processes. I know we've touched upon ideas in India and in America with the whole community-based stuff, but are there any other, I guess, examples of democratic processes and political involvement of disabled people out there? Anyone?
I can speak about monitoring globally. So a couple of years ago, I was awarded an inaugural Global Judy Human Fellowship to understand how other disabled people around the world do monitoring. And I think one of the key things that we learned from this was that that no one does it. no one is maximizing the potential of monitoring, and that actually New Zealand's model is seen as one of the best. What we saw is that because Article 33 is quite ambiguous in its language to account for different states and their different funding systems, their socio-political infrastructure, means that it can be interpreted in a wide variety of ways. But the key ingredient that is often missed in other states is the independence of the disability voice. So a lot of the countries, people from African countries, from different Asian countries, they spoke about the employment of disabled people in public service or in, for example, human rights institutions, but that there needs to be a true separation between those voices and representing the disability community and independent voices of the disability community. And I think that's where we find the magic, is that yes, it is important to employ disabled people in the public service in our human rights institutions, but we also need to fund, invest in, and support the independent voice of people who are not employed as public officials. And that is where, for me, the magic lies.
I've
Oh, thank
also,
you for that.
I've just added also, there's a beautiful website that's gathering up thousands and thousands of examples around the world of these innovations. And I've just put in response to that question, the site's called participedia.net. And if you go in there, there's in that link I just provided has 213 examples of people around the world who have created something that is empowering disabled communities with disability, but also changing how those broader processes involve persons with disabilities within that suite of innovation. So please have a look for ideas and inspiration there.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. Another question that I was thinking about was, how can we go about, I guess, promoting the idea for disabled people to stand for their local council or even for government? I mean, how do we go about encouraging people to do that? Anyone?
I can jump in if while others think. Oh, Rebecca, you've got your microphone off. Did you want to jump in there?
I don't have any easy answers, and I think what I would observe is that it is also true that the number of candidates prepared to put their hand up both at local body elections and the general election seems to be declining. I haven't got data to support that, but it certainly seems that in the modern day with social media and various other things, it is a less attractive proposition for anybody. My sense would be that as a community, we need to be sort of prepared to wrap our support around someone who is willing to put their hand up for those sorts of roles. I'm sure Mojo probably has some ideas, but it is a very exposed place to be, and I think that in addition to barriers, very real barriers that people experience, it is a very kind of lonely and isolating kind of position to be in, and so yeah, no easy answers. Over to you, Robbie.
I think that that follows the lines of exactly what I was going to say. There is a fair bit of distrust of working in government spaces by the disability community at the moment because of what's going on. And so the question is, why would you want to work there? Is one question. But I think the other thing that we hear is that I think there needs to be education in political parties as well, because where you feature on a list, if you put up your hand and you have the support from the Electoral Commission, amazing. And you are still so far down the list because the political party that you are putting your name for maybe doesn't see the value, or there are others that bring more value in their perspective, and you're down the list, then it doesn't matter how much support you have around you. If you're not higher up on the list, you're not going to get into those positions. So I think there needs to be some work around education for our political parties about what disabled people, the value they bring, and other speakers have touched on that beautifully today about the the expertise of lived experience, and that when we're bringing perspectives, we are thinking about the whole community, not just, what's good for disabled people is good for everyone. So I would like to see more education and awareness amongst political parties on where they place disabled people on the list.
Cool. Great answers. Okay, last question, and this will be I'll ask every one of you. So your last question is, what is your vision for the future around disability and democracy? So let's start off with Anusha.
Thank you. I guess my vision is that we wouldn't be differentiating, that people would just be able to access services, and it would be normal services that everyone can access regardless of who you are. And, so all services should be provided so everyone can access them in the way they want to.
Fantastic. Rebecca.
The benefit of going second is I can echo Anusha's and add to it, and that might happen all the way through the panel, I suspect. Yes, that. And disabled people are undertaking leadership and governance roles in community organisations and disabled persons organisations up and down the country at rates that probably exceed non-disabled people. So the opportunity is there for that leadership and governance experience to come through and be reflected in public service and in government, and in political parties. So I think the vision I would express is, imagine if there were no societal barriers, what would that look like? And I think that would be pretty cool. So yeah, that's my 10 cents. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Emily.
I think what would, if the onus was felt to be among those whose ways are taken as the way we do things now, the onus is on those groups to actually to realize that we are lacking the understanding, we're lacking the skills, and actually those, even if it's a minoritized experience, that makes it all the more precious. Like that's the bit that's missing, and that's what enriches all of our ability to make good decisions together. And so I think if we felt that onus, I was thinking about my supervisor working in disability and democracy would say, we don't look to astronauts and say that they're somehow a deficit. They're in an environment that wasn't designed for them, and so we design the environment for that. And so that's what we should be looking at all of our environments that way. And I guess the sense of who's not listening, who's unable to hear, whose systems are incapable of being able to be responsive and though that's where the onus is, I guess. And so that's more of a structural view versus and valuing what is marginalized because it is precious to our ability to see more of our collective world. So I guess really embedding that in our way of thinking about what's missing, who's missing. Kia ora, that's all that comes to mind now. But the idea of workplace democracy came up when Huhanahiki was talking about, or no, it was Shara who was talking about decision making meaningfully in every day. The experience every day of being able to make meaningful decisions that shape our lives, like that also just feeling democracy run through all of our everyday experiences, that ends up leading to more people coming out to vote and more, running for office, because we can feel it, our own agency in our own lives. We can't depend generally on once a year, every 3 years a decision to be able to have a vital sense of our democracy. So yeah, I feel like that looking at how we can revitalize that ability in our everyday lives also is a part of this story here. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Emily. Ruby, last but not least.
Yeah, and I'll keep it short because it's a yes and from the other panelists. For me, it's understanding lived experience as expertise that brings value, that brings insights, that is good for everyone. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and appreciate your feedback. So I'm just going to pass it on back to Mojo, I believe.
Thank you so much, Piotr and the panelists for that really thoughtful discussion. And I will now welcome our second panel, which is the creators and doers. And I'm pleased to introduce Umi Asgata. Umi is a researcher with the Donald Beasley Institute, and she contributes to research that helps inform policy and practice, ensuring the lived experience of disabled people remain at the centre of decision making. And there is just a reminder I've had to pass on to please say your name before speaking to ensure that blind and low vision participants know who is speaking throughout the discussion. Thank you, and over to you, Umi.
Kia ora, Mojo. Thank you for the introduction. This is Umi speaking, and it is my honor to introduce you to the creators and doers panel for this webinar. Firstly, we have Nick Rowan, who is a disability activist and thought leader. Welcome. And secondly, we have Will Kim, who is a Kiwi Access Manager at Hospitality New Zealand. Welcome, Will. And thirdly, we have Susan Martel, who is a Legal Supervisor Associate at Aotearoa Disability Law. Welcome, Susan. And lastly but not least, we have Dr. Sailor Peterson Hamlin, who is a forward counselor at the Auckland Council. Welcome, Dr. Sailor. And you now have 5 minutes each to share your initial statement addressing the question, what role do politics and demographic process play in creating inclusion and belonging for disabled people? And similarly to Mojo, can I please remind you all to say your first name before you start speaking? Can we start with you, Nick?
Kia ora koutou. It's Nick Rowan speaking. Kia ora koutou, tangata whaikaha whānau. I just wanted to thank Access Matters, Mojo, you, Umi, for hosting this panel. This is kind of a personal topic for me at the moment around representation and politics, but I'll try to keep it out of the personal and into the how do we do things better frame for today. I was thinking about what we do here in New Zealand and how we do enable participation for our members of the disability community. And the thing that stood out to me was around access versus power. And we do access really well, actually, in New Zealand. The bill that Mojo sponsored to create the Access Fund is actually really good when you look at the international comparators. So we're doing access really, really well, and we should be really proud of ourselves for what we've done there in terms of providing access, meeting accessibility needs, and funding all of that side of things. So on that side of things, we're doing really, really well. On the power side of things, on the who actually decides side of things, we've got a lot of work to do. And I think that's fair to say. I think most people wouldn't have a challenge with that statement. I reflect back on my time as I spent 7 years as chair of an accessibility advisory group to a city council. And there was a lot of passion and effort and people very passionate about topics, but all those groups can ever do is advise. They can never influence and actually make decisions. And that's an example of an advisory capacity. Citizens' assemblies are another example, which have become into the news quite recently. Again, they can only ever advise. They can't really influence decision making. So from a perspective of someone who really wants to achieve big change, they're just not good enough at the moment, and we just don't have enough vehicles for disabled people to be in positions where we can actually make the change that we want to see. Some of the things that I'm starting to think about are having much more designed pathways for our young people or our rangatahi to get involved. I know from personal experience that some of our other communities have really designed pathways into political internship and then roles in political spaces, and then they go off into candidate selection. I can't think of a single example of a disabled young person or anyone that's really had a designed pathway into a leadership role like that. Members of our community do it almost by accident, and they have people around them that support them, and I think that's really it's a wonderful thing when it happens, but it needs to be more intentional and more focused, and I think we need to be we need to make a decision that it's important for us. I'm not sure whether we're fully on board with the idea that we want to have disabled people in the parliament in numbers yet. I think some of the discussion earlier was kind of made me think that we're not fully behind that idea. So I think if we don't come to an agreement on that idea, that we need to have disabled people in numbers in the parliament right across all political parties to argue over the budget, over bills in select committees, then we just won't make any change at all. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to having this discussion. I think it'll be fascinating to see what people have to say. I'm looking forward to the questions. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Emmy.
Nick, thank you so much for highlighting important challenges and some of the tangible ways we could approach these challenges. So we're very excited to have more discussion with you later. Can we go over to you, Will?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And again, thanks to Access Matters for creating the space. I'm Will, it's Will speaking. I'm here on behalf of the Kiwi Access Card. I'm familiar with this program, but I'm aware that many of you may not be. So I think it's important to kind of provide some context as to where I'm coming from in this space today. So the Kiwi Access Card and my representation today is more talking specifically about the access vertical for enrollment for voting. I'm by no means an expert in policy or disability matters, and as such, I've actually just come with two things. One is an on-the-ground perspective as to what it means to create systems which allow easier enrollment, easier proof of identity, and two, an abundance of curiosity to try and listen and figure out how we can do even better. Something that Nick said earlier during his statement was, I think, quote, designed pathways for our rangatahi. And I think that's something that we resonate with strongly as well. So given that we're a creators and doers panel, I thought rather than talking about all the things that we have already kind of been covered as to what we'd love to see and what we'd love to bring to the market, I thought I would cover some of the things that are already in place and use that as an opportunity to get your feedback on how we can continue to do even better. So I'll try to provide a bit of context here. So the Kiwi Access Card's been around for 26 years. Previously, it was known as the 18 Plus card. And the main purpose is to provide an ID for anyone who doesn't hold a driver's license or a passport. So some of you on listening today may have one, you may not. But the purpose of this card has kind of shifted slowly over time. The reason that we're owned by Hospitality New Zealand is because it started off as a proof of age card for sales and supply of alcohol or age restricted goods. And we rebranded to Kiwi Access about 5 years ago. The point of this rebrand was to better represent what we're actually trying to do, which is addressing the right to be seen, to be recognized and counted as a full part, a participant in society by being able to prove your identity in an easier manner. So although we've had a long path to get here, I am excited to be here and talking to you today so that we can figure out how to make it even more accessible. So when we did the rebrand, the Minister for Disabilities at the time described the card as a card that would allow disabled people to prove who they are so they can do things like open bank accounts, make hire purchases, pick up prescriptions, and that's all true. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there is still a gap. We've ensured, and we've done a lot of hard work to ensure that we have the identity assurance requirements to exceed even the levels of information security provided in ID documents like the NCTA driver's license. And we're getting closer and closer to the levels of assurance that you'd expect from something like a passport. However, being a non-government ID, we're a non-profit organization that's managing this program, working closely with the Department of Affairs, of Internal Affairs. But because we are not under the government umbrella, it's taken time and it continues to take time to reflect that in legislation. Fortunately, those changes are happening and we're getting there. But part of the conversation today that I was quite excited about was hearing Anusha from the Electoral Commission speaking about their role and their responsibility on making enrollment barriers smaller or reducing those enrollment barriers. And I think she specifically said, what we don't get right this time, we'll get right next time. And I'm absolutely very keen to take her up on that statement. So although the Kiwi Access card has been around for a long time in the form of the 18 plus card, we've made a series of changes that I'd like to encourage other doers and creators to look at as just like small incremental changes that can help in this challenge that we're all facing together around accessibility. So little things that we've done to try and make it easier and more accessible are things like adding Braille onto our cards and having embossed numbers and letterings to support those with low vision. We've also been changing how the online application process works. I mean, firstly, we introduced the online application process to allow provision of this card from the comfort of your own home. But we've now taken one step further and we're working on the current project, which is the first photo ID digital credential in New Zealand. So another method that we can hopefully prove in more in a larger variety of ways that you are who you are, with less barriers and less inconvenience in doing so, and less expectation that everyone has equal access to all modes of proving themselves. Now, that is a bit of a tangent. Coming back to the original question that we started with, which is what role do political and democratic systems play in promoting inclusion and belonging? From where we stand from an identity issuer perspective, I don't think we should be accepting identity systems that exclude people by design. We should not be excluding people that can't get a driver's license or a passport or simply choose not to. Inclusion in democracy has to start with the ability to be recognized and to be able to show up. And that should not discriminate whether you're doing that digitally, physically, or however else on your own terms. We know that we're not there yet, but I think these discussions are very important, and I'm excited to have this conversation with the other panelists to figure out what more we can do to get closer every day. And with the Kiwi Access card going kind of into the digital space with the digital credential, I think we're moving in the right direction. But I really would like to encourage anyone that's listening today to raise their voice and inform us as to how we could be doing better. And we do very much value your lived experience. Yeah, with that, I'll hand back to Amy. Thanks.
Kia ora, Will. Thank you so much for your sharing and the real tangible approach that's happening in the identity card space. So that was really great to learn. And can we go to you, Susan?
Tēnā koe, ko Susan Martel-aho. Ngā mihi in particular, Dr. Beausoleil, for your words of hope. Beausoleil, sunny outlook. I'm really, really impressed with what you shared on what is possible, especially looking at other jurisdictions. So I'm a lawyer, and please forgive a certain amount of cynicism on my part. We live in a democracy. We have Te Tiriti o Waitangi, we have the Bill of Rights Act, and we have the Human Rights Act. We have agreed to uphold the rights in the UNCRPD. We have Whaikaha. We have the New Zealand Disability Strategy and their 5 priority outcomes areas at the moment are education, employment, health, housing, and justice, which I think we could say kind of covers it all. We have the independent monitoring mechanism. So why are we even having this kōrero today? Because for a democratic system to operate fairly, there must be meaningful processes that we can use to enforce our rights. So we have the Human Rights Commission and the Human Rights Review Tribunal. We have the Office of the Health and Disability Commissioner. We have the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. We have the Ombudsman. Most importantly, for many of our clients at Aotearoa Disability Law, is the process that they must follow to access disability support services. And it's our job at ADL to tell clients that they can complain that their rights have been breached, but they might have to wait for years. This is because those bodies or those commissions are understaffed and under-resourced. We have to tell clients that appealing to a higher level is risky. It may require paying for a lawyer, and the kind of lawyer they need is almost impossible to find, even if they have the legal aid approved to pay for that lawyer. So from this cynical old lawyer, my advice is don't give up. Keep complaining, even if it takes years. Complain to your MP and vote. Vote for those people who will truly uphold democracy, not just pay lip service to it. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, Susan. I think the power of your words coming from the years of experience is not cynical, but is powerful. So thank you so much for that. Can we go to you, Dr. Sarah?
Kia ora, thank you so much. So my name is Sarah Patterson-Hemlin. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm an Auckland counsellor. Prior to that, I was working in the disability sector for the Upside Downs Education Trust, Raukatori Music Therapy Trust, and New Zealand Down Syndrome Association. I am autistic with ADHD, as is my eldest son. And I think one reason I'm here this morning is to fly the flag for local government. So that's what I'm going to focus on in my response to the question. So when we think of political and democratic systems, most of us would think of central government first. If someone says political leader or decision maker, the first people that pop into our mind will probably be an MP or the Prime Minister, and the place you think about will probably be Parliament. And that has been the case a little bit this morning, and that is totally understandable. Local government is not the democratic system that we really hear about on the daily. But local government makes a lot of the decisions that shape our everyday lives. So can a wheelchair user access a beach? Is the lighting in the library impossible for someone with a photosensitive condition like myself? Are the streets impassable for those with low vision? Will there be an NZSL interpreter at the local play? Will I need to navigate stairs to get to the social club in my community hall? All of these decisions are made locally, and that's why I'd argue that local government deserves a lot more of our attention than it gets. One way that Auckland and other local democratic systems promote inclusion and belonging, and we've heard them mentioned and some of their limitations, but these are advisory panels, and I'm the Chief Liaison Councillor for those panels at Auckland Council, so I will promote them. We have 9 of them, and the Disability Advisory Panel is one of them. And these panels ask the question that Umi asked in another webinar that I was fortunate to attend, that I was very inspired by, which is who is not in the room? And advisory panels bring many who are traditionally not in the room to the table, quite literally often. And when access needs aren't met, it's not usually because there's someone somewhere with a massive clipboard saying, make sure access needs aren't met. It's usually because the need isn't known or considered at an early enough stage. And what so many of our systems demand is that disabled people do the work and wrestle for months or years with bureaucracy, as we've heard about, until the need, or a compromised version of it, more likely, is met or they run out of energy. So accessibility needs to be considered from the outset in the same way that cost overruns or population trends or weather events are considered now. And when it comes to the room itself, there's also more we can do to ensure disabled voices are there. And as we've heard from a few different places, first and foremost, we can vote, but crucially, we can vote locally as well as nationally. So only 29% of eligible voters cast a ballot in Auckland's elections last year, and that was roughly in keeping with the rest of the country. It would take a statistical anomaly of epic proportions for disabled people not to be part of that 71% who didn't cast a ballot. We've heard the Electoral Access Fund mentioned this morning. Now, that's only if you're running for central government. I've been advocating for a while now to expand that to local government. We can be ready as disability communities, but also as local government structures to support disabled representatives when they are elected. I have to be honest and say much of my experience has felt like building the plane as I fly it, and some parts of Auckland Council have been given a bit of a crash course in accessibility just by virtue of my existence. And when we're elected, we can be unapologetically and openly ourselves. Now, I admit that's not something I've mastered yet. This is a wero to myself. I am still whakama at times. I hide or minimise my access needs. I'm a 36-year-old female first-time councillor in a big room full of big voices, and to be heard and respected is not easy. So to put my hand up and say, I need to leave the session because the lights are too bright and I can't think anymore and I'm worried I might have a seizure, is not a barrier I have yet crossed, and that is as public as I have ever been, in fact, just then. And I know time and energy are precious. We all have to prioritise, but one small thing could be that for every 5 times we talk about central government, we swap it out once for local, and that would have a big impact. This could be things like, if you're thinking of emailing your local MP, as others have suggested, CC in your local councillor. Do you know who your local councillor is? Submitting on a piece of legislation. Is there a local consultation open in your area? So to conclude with hope, hopefully, in the 8 months that I've been an Auckland councillor, I've been pleasantly surprised by how receptive other elected members and staff and organisations have been to embrace a disability lens and take a closer look where there are gaps, and to incorporate disabled voices more meaningfully. So the next time politics comes up and local government goes unmentioned, remember how much of your everyday life it shapes and how many ways there are to shape it back. You can vote in local elections, contact your councillor or local board member if you're in Auckland about what matters to you, apply to join an advisory panel, or put your own name forward as an elected member. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Dr. Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience and the challenges you face, as well as the encouragement for us to be part of the local council and join the ways we can join these pathways. So that was really great to hear that. We now have about 10 minutes for Q&A time, and we have lots of questions that are coming through the Q&A section. We'd like to start with a question from Patty Poor. This is for you, Nick. What is an education pathway to move towards more people in political space?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'd actually like to support Dr. Sarah's comments around local government in this context as well. I feel like it's too big a jump to go straight into national politics for many of our community on so many different levels. I'll give you one example. When I was announced as a candidate in the 2023 election, within about 10 minutes, I had a flood of, let's just describe it as not very pleasant social media communication. So yeah, and so we need to protect our whānau and our people that are doing that. But what I would say is that I would absolutely support what Dr. Sarah is saying about local government, because there is an opportunity to, if you like, build up the skill sets that you will need if you have an aspiration to take that further in local government. I know from my personal experience on chairing advisory group, even though I might speak about it in less than pleasant terms at this point, you build up skills. You build up skills around chairing meetings, around working with elected officials, around working with the council officials, in terms of how to get things through the machinery of local government. And I think that those are the skill sets that we need to start building up with our young people, in an environment that's less heated as national politics can be. So I think we should be making much better use of local government in that context. But in terms of like a pathway, they're doing really good things in Scotland around creating pathways for, which is unusual. You know, they do amazing things in Scotland and no one ever hears about it, which is sad. But they do incredible things around creating internships, creating opportunities for people to go into local government, central government, and just see if it's something that you want to do, in an environment that's not as heated as if you put your hand up and say, I want to be a candidate, and all of the stress and pressure that goes with that. So I think there are things we can do, and we should look to local government as a vehicle, plus also the disability sector, I think, as well. There are opportunities for us to grow those governance skill sets, decision-making skill sets as well.
Kia ora, Nick. And I know I'm a moderator, but I thought one of the pathway I was student officer at my university for my student university association, and many politicians come from university student associations, so it can be one of the pathways for disabled students to also join these university student associations, councils, and move from there. The other question that was related to the local council from Sacha Dylan is, we don't have enough leverage. Rights do not resonate well in the local government. It's more of a practical culture. Is there anyone coordinating a strategic approach across council now, like we tried to do 15 to 20 years ago? Does anyone have answer to this question?
Not that I'm aware of, I would say, and I would hope I would have heard. No, it's there doesn't appear to be any kind of groups. I'm part of, believe it or not, the young elected members informal group, because that's just if you're elected before you're 40, which might say something about the average age in local government. But the part of the challenge is that a lot of those representative groups have been coordinated through Local Government New Zealand. Auckland Council has left Local Government New Zealand, which doesn't help. So there's nothing I'm aware of. While I'm speaking, I just want to add a quick thought into what Nick was saying, which is that oftentimes there are part-time opportunities within local government. So if you're a local board member in Auckland, for example, or on some of the regional councils, that's a part-time opportunity, which can also be helpful for some who aren't in a position for whatever reason to work full-time. But yeah, not that I'm aware of, that would be great.
Thanks, Sarah. And this might be a question for you, Susan or Nick. It's a question from Tomo, and it's saying, is there a disability quota system affirming action at the legislature and policy-making bodies, such as disability quota system should make sure legislature adequately include representatives with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities who are discriminatorily regarded as lacking credibility as well, shouldn't it? Sorry.
Can you answer, Nick? My thoughts on a quota are it's quite a fraught question. A quota would be better than nothing, but what do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I looked at this actually, because I think everyone is quite keen for representation to occur, and a quota is a very blunt instrument to make it happen. And I think some of our jurisdictions where we look to, Scotland, I'm bringing up Scotland again. Scotland hasn't gone down the quota route. There are some examples where they have gone down the quota route, and it doesn't produce good outcomes in the Parliament because it creates a sense of othering with MPs. That MPs are seen as quota MPs, and that's ultimately not good for those MPs. So, I mean, it's something that we can have a think about, but I think we need to find better mechanisms to get our disabled representatives into the Parliament. Yeah. So, but there is research on this question, and I'd encourage people to go out there and look at it and see what it says, because it is a very blunt tool, and we can just come in straight over the top and say that there should be, say, for example, 10 MPs who come from disability community in the Parliament to represent the 25%. But I'm just not certain whether that's going to give us what we need long term. We should really be having a carrot and stick approach. We should be incentivizing our parties to make the decisions that they should make, and encouraging them to do that through their own democratic processes rather than coming straight over the top and saying this is what you're going to do, with a stick down the road that if you don't do it by this period of time, then we will come down with a legislative response.
Thank you, Nick. Does anyone else want to comment to this? Yeah, I think this question is similar to the answer you already provided, Nick, but this comes from Nicole. How do we make politics safer for everyone? These environments are disabling by their very nature, and I think it speaks to core of some of the things that has been already discussed.
I think one of the things that's been mentioned is speaking about internal party political structures, and there's definitely I think some really good some fertile ground there to work on across the board. Part of the issue with local government is that by and large it is not party political. I was elected on a party ticket, but I am very much in the minority. Apologies, this is Sarah speaking. In terms of making it safer, I think it probably is important, and there's been a bit in the media about Auckland Council today on this. It is probably important to acknowledge that at the moment, local government is often not safe for most in many different reasons. There's a lot of challenges there. Part of it is it does not receive the same scrutiny, the same sort of oxygen of publicity, I suppose, as central government, and that can sometimes lead to some not great behaviours. Where in terms of for disabled people in particular, I think there can be some really good work done, is acknowledging that disabled people might not necessarily just or solely be constituents or staff of local government. They may also be elected representatives. So one of the challenges I came across was that I was not able to access reasonable accommodations support because elected members at Auckland Council are not employees, they are contractors. And so some of the structures that we have around elected members can often actually be quite far behind the structures that we have in place for disabled staff members. So acknowledging that, bringing that a little bit more into line, and having those structures within councils themselves that reflect that, you know, disabled people may be elected is probably a really great place to start doing a bit more mahi.
Yeah, Kia ora, Taylor.
Yeah, I'd just like to share an example that I had the privilege to see. And that goes to physical accessibility in our parliament. And I wrote about this a little while ago, but it bears talking about it again. There's some amazing work going on to make our debating chamber more physically accessible. The team down at Parliamentary Service had a challenge put to them. What would happen if a wheelchair user became an elected member? And what would you do? I know, you know, God forbid, you know, but sorry, I'm being
cynical.
I'm a little bit cynical there, but anyway, that was the challenge that was put to them, and they have worked assiduously for the last 12 months with the design teams and with builders and all sorts of people who are experts in this space to make our parliament more physically accessible, to start to think about removing the debating chamber chairs and widening the doorways and doing all sorts of things. And you know, it's not widely known that they're doing that, but they're doing it and they're in preparation. So from my perspective, that's a really positive thing to see. I think the thing that we need to focus on now is the psychological safety, and also the ability for members to bring their full selves to the workplace, because Parliament is ultimately a workplace, Council is ultimately a workplace, rather than relying on them masking themselves when they come to work in order to fit in with the dominant culture that's in those environments, which is pretty confrontational and pretty full on at times. So I think we've got some work to do there to enable a more inclusive culture around the debating chamber, select committees. But I feel like we can do that work. And I think actually when you talk to our members of Parliament, they will actually admit, maybe privately, that that's something that they want to. And it will benefit everybody. It's a funny thing about accessibility inclusions, that the general population benefits the most, and they're usually the first in line to get the benefit from them. So yeah, I think that's something that we can look to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of the Q&A session, but this Creators and Doers panel has been awesome, learning about different ways we can be participating into this democratic process. So thank you so much for sharing your lived experience as well as your expertise. And there are lots of great comments in the Q&A section about different ways people have participated in their process themselves as well. So thank you, and I'll hand back to you, Mojo.
Thank you so much, Umi and the panel. I have been following the discussion very closely and absolutely resonate with so many of the points that you have all been raising, and there have been some very strong, consistent themes come through. And it also made me reflect on my own journey into Parliament as you were all speaking, because actually I did start by standing for local body election, and not many people are aware of that. I first stood for ECAN, for Regional Council, and that was what gave me a taste of what campaigning is involved, what's involved in campaigning. And actually, when I first drafted the Election Access Fund, the original intent and vision was for it to include provide support for disabled people standing for local body elections as well as for central government. It was one of the aspects that got dropped off, but the full power of that fund will only be realised when it can be gets extended to local body elections as well. for the reasons that so many of you have been raising on the panel. So thank you for that. And also I wrote down as people were speaking right from the start, some of the phrases that really jumped out at me. The right to be who we are. Disabled people are citizens. Nothing about us without us. Democracy is for everyone. Trust in democratic systems is important. If we are affected by a decision, we should shape these decisions. Nothing can replace authentic co-design. What is good for disabled people is good for everyone. The challenge to political parties to ensure actual power to electable positions for disabled candidates. I heard about pathways to political internship and roles. And the powerful message from Susan, don't give up. I think stubbornness can be a really useful quality in this. So thank you all so much for the powerful choreo. And Access Matters has been working to break down ableism and remove barriers that prevent disabled people from fully participating in life. And to do this effectively, they need to understand the impact of initiatives like Choreo Returns. There is a short survey in the chat for the audience. Please take 2 minutes to fill it out. Panelists, speakers and moderators, you will receive a different survey link by email. So now it's my great pleasure to hand back over to David to close us with the karakia.
Kia karakia tātou. Kia whakaaria te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tūriki whakataha ai, kia tūriki whakataha ai. Haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Restrictions are moved aside so the pathway is clear to return to everyday activities. Join, gather, entwine.